everyone. This is a very special edition of Freedom Revolution Network. I'm Liberty Librarian Heather Biedermann.
Hello, everyone. And I'm Scarlett Anonymous. So thank you for joining us here today. We're trying to do a little bit new format with the news and information and lifestyle news that we're kind of doing here. And so it's an exciting new segment. And I've been having a lot of fun this week talking to many different people. I already talked to Dr. Anna Jackson earlier this week, a naturopathic physician. And we had an interesting talk about what, natural medicine looks like now in the age of COVID. So that was an interesting conversation.
I love that. That's really exciting stuff for me. I think that people don't talk about it enough, or they're kind of held down. So I think that is wonderful. I hope everyone checks that out too.
Yes, absolutely.
And I know you were out and about yesterday covering news for the whole riot in Minneapolis of people have been living under a rock. Would you talk about that for just a little bit?
Yeah, I got lots to say about it. So if you have been living under a rock, there is, civil unrest occurring right now against an event that happened with an African-American man who was murdered. And I'm just going to say it like that. There's no allegedly, there's no, we saw it, So this has been an ongoing systemic problem in Minneapolis. Why it may seem like a flashpoint or a flashbang grenade to people who are outside of our area. This has been a systemic issue that's been happening in Minneapolis for many, many years. So I think this was, even though, yes, his life matters and that's what people are out for, I think a lot of the pain and anguish comes from previous events or things that occurred. I myself personally have been assaulted by the Minneapolis 3rd Precinct when I was 14 years old.
Oh, Lord.
So, I know a lot of people have the same stories who can give the same story about that same precinct. So if we know that systemically this has been happening for many years, I see how people have decided that they are no longer wanting to deal with this militarized police state.
Absolutely.
And I don't blame them in that regard. Now, the way maybe some of the protesting is occurring, okay, but let's explain a few things that I think are important, right?
Okay.
So the building and the pictures that are going around the country of that building that was on fire. That building was a mixed-use development building, okay? And it did not have very much affordable housing. So the people who started on fire felt like it was gentrifying the neighborhood and that they did not want it in the neighborhood. That's why it was burned down. The Target had stopped selling milk. People were coming in as buying customers to buy milk to antidote the pepper spray. Target's manager got wind of this and decided to close the store.
Oh, you see, they never talked about that.
Oh, they don't want to tell you that. So the people decided, well, you don't want to sell us as paying customers. We will no longer be paying customers. Whether I agree with that or not, wasn't there to say, but what I can say is the people felt like what they were doing is a new term that I'm coining called anarcho-liberation, right?
Right.
Because that's kind of what I felt what it was. It was anarchy, but they felt like what they were doing, because I kept asking people, I wanted to really know, like, were they there just to start stuff? Were they there really about the cause? What were they there for? And the majority of people just said, we want to break the institutions. Okay. We want to show them that we're in control as we the people. And I thought that was a really big statement, hearing that from people in walks of life that I think other people may not think that they would hear this from. This is urban, inner city people who are like, no, we're tired of this. We're tired of the systems of oppression. So we're here to bust those down. The AutoZone, I don't know why they burned down the AutoZone. That was ridiculous, super chemical. At one point, the flames started coming out purple and like sparks were shooting out the front door.
That's a bad sign. It could explode.
We kind of backed away because my honey, as we call him on the network, Mr. Tire, he obviously works on cars. And so he was like, there's brake clean in there and we need to back up. Because they've started like brake clean fires just even in their shop. So he was like, to have it on fire, I highly recommend we get back.
That's a good person to listen to.
He was the person to listen to. But it was just interesting to watch police movements. At some points, they held the line further up. Then they were moved back by people. Then they were moved all the way back to the precinct to where the whole street, people were coming up and down, driving, doing donuts in the middle of the street, hanging out a car. It was a party. One quote that I will not forget ever in my life. They canceled the state fair. So we're going to make this motherfucker a state fair.
Oh, my God. Oh,
I was like, oh, wow. I was like, we're in a whole new world now. Like,
somebody needs to sell, like, I don't know, funnel cakes or something, and then it would be.
Right? I mean, it was like that, though. It felt like a block party atmosphere. A lot of people were like, oh, a lot of the news this morning locally was like, we can't get our reporters in. There was no reason why they couldn't get their reporters in. There was no sense of danger. There was no sense of like fear for your life. Like in other areas, you may feel that way. Everybody was just very kind, welcoming. There were people giving out first aid, handing out masks, water, anything people really needed because they took it out of the store to begin with. But
it's like free.
But it was like there was a community sense of help, and there was. I didn't feel afraid at any point. The only time I felt afraid is when I saw the police advance at us in, some serious maneuvers. But other than that, as far as the people had a sense of just like freedom and liberty. And it was just like they were doing their own thing. They were playing music. People were dancing. People had looted the liquor store. So people had carts full of beer and were passing them out and drinking.
Oh,
it was I've never seen anything like that in my life. And I don't think compared to what's going on right now, though, we might continue to see it because St. Paul is getting a serious brunt. I think people woke up and saw what Minneapolis did and now are like, I can do it too. And now the whole city's in chaos.
I know. I have a friend in. I'm going to pull this back. So anyway, I have a friend in St. Paul who was walking down the main streets, and he went right up to, I think, one of the Targets that was having people.
I saw this too. We had shared this from Freedom Revolution Network, so people can see that stream.
Please see it. And, he just walked right up. So if they are saying reporters can't get into that, it is not right at all. And he walked up and people were talking to him and being friendly. And then all of a sudden you just saw this mad wave of people and people, they're throwing gas canisters at them.
Yeah, these are called triple chaser gas canisters. So I was listening to the scanner yesterday, and me being the person that I am, I do a lot of research. So I found out the company that the gas comes from, and they're called triple chasers. And it's a CNS nerve gas agent made out of California. 3 canisters that when they deploy, they have to kind of do it at an angle. When it drops, 3 canisters spin out and then shoot out gas for 20 to 30 seconds apiece.
That's crazy.
I mean, these were purchased during Jamar Clark. So they've been holding on to these for a while.
Oh, Lord. I pray that everyone is going to be okay. And I will say one of the things that from my library side, my library news, I have a friend that lives in that neighborhood. What's that?
Why'd they break into the library?
They didn't. They broke windows. But what I heard was one of the libraries, they started throwing bricks or something to break the windows, and then people came running up and said, "Don't do the library, don't, just leave it alone." And they did. I mean, they broke a couple windows, but they didn't go through and mess it up, as far as I know. I mean, things can change, but I felt like that was a good thing. There's good things out of this, but it comes out of a horrible situation.
Well, that's just it. And I think there were a lot of people out there who were fighting, and telling people. There were some kids who had paintball guns who ran up to the front line of the police and started shooting them.
That's kind of crazy.
The people in the crowd were like, "You are putting the rest of us in danger. We will beat you right now here on these streets, and you won't be able to pop another paintball on anyone." Because
they may think it's funny.
How dare you?
Yeah. If you could get us killed, that's not worth it, dude.
Well, yeah, over when we're not ready to make an attack or make a move or, as the front line of people, I don't know what organization structure they had, but, I'm just assuming.
The majority of the people there are there for peaceful protests. They're not there to destroy and they're not there to loot. And I think that's a misconception that a lot of people have. And I live in like rural Minnesota, basically. So I'm far away from it. So you see things from the news and you go, but I'm also seeing it from social media. So I know what they're saying isn't exactly true. So that's why I love that we do this. So
because I that's why I had to go out. I sat about it, and a lot of people were like, Scarlett, don't go out. Just don't go out. But this is where my family grew up. This is where I've been at Cup Foods as a little girl.
Right.
My mom's gassed her car at that Speedway as a young child. Like, I know this area. Like I said, my cousins grew up right next to where that building is built. They lived in a house that was right there. So I come from this area. So it wasn't necessarily scary for me. But for other people, I could see why. But once you got down there, people were just taking walks and strolls. You saw couples just, going out and minding their business, just watching it. And I mean, at a certain point, everybody came out and watched basically the world burn. Yeah. And it was such an interesting moment because you had that huge fire that had like 200 feet flames in the air and embers even higher into the sky. I've never seen anything like that. And everybody was just like, this is amazing. Like, it was just awe-inspiring. There was nothing to say about it, but just wow.
Do you think that, we've been through COVID-19 this year, and it's kind of made that everything is like super tense. Do you think that maybe like this was a spark that made it even more of a fire because of what we're going through right now?
I do think the oppression, and I think for two reasons. I think the oppression too, that the police, haven't really been interacting with the public, and now some of those things have been, moved back. The question is, why did even park police come? Why were they there? Yeah. That's not their jurisdiction. So I think that people, it's hard. This is such a complicated, it's so many different layers. I do think that COVID had something to do with it because in a way it's kind of like an allegory for the I can't breathe, right? COVID is like a condition that makes it to where you can't breathe. Right. And so is it subconsciously rising in people when this occurred to then strike back?
It might be. I don't know. I mean, I think about it and go, like, it just feels like it's so much more intense than not that I expected, but that it's catching around. I saw in Los Angeles, people are rioting there now. And I think lots of parts of the country have a lot of sympathy because this is going on everywhere.
It is. And communities around the country know that this has been happening. And so now it's time for people to acknowledge and no longer pretend that this is okay. I've seen a lot of people stand up and be allies, which has been a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing. I think people that I never even expected to have this opinion and be like, no, this is wrong. Absolutely. There's no in between. Has been, I think, there's a paradigm shift right now. There's an energy shift that's happening. And I don't know if it's happening because of COVID in general. People have been kind of just changing the way they're doing their lives and that, or if there's something bigger or greater, but I do feel this energy shift. And I felt like something was shifting last night just in how people were receiving it. I heard a lot of good things. I felt like we could have recruited a lot of good libertarians out there. They were talking about good stuff. Like, because just the ideas that they have, they don't realize that many other people hold who are into liberty and freedom. The things that they are talking about are freedoms of which you haven't been privy to understand the context. A lot of people in urban neighborhoods, they just don't even hear about these type of things. They're not in these conversations. And so,
if you don't ever hear it anywhere, you're never going to really know that it exists.
Or that people also agree with you somewhere else. Exactly. So I think that there could be a lot, if people could become organized, and there could be a lot of more community outreach right now, just trying to help direct the anger, help direct how people are feeling, find the groups who want to protest peacefully, organize them in the places where they need to be, and try to focus on that and try to give some semblance of a front line and as a group. I think that's going to help the movement. Otherwise, right now, all the work that people have done yet this far, it will be destroyed by the looters that are currently pillaging St. Paul.
That's my fear, is that the balance of it might tip too far and destructive and not constructive.
I think that's where we're at. When people woke up this morning in St. Paul and just started looting, I think they weren't doing it because of the protest. They were doing it because Minneapolis did it, and they knew they could get away with it if there was enough of them. That's what I think the St. Paul riot is more about than actually George Floyd protesting those things. I think they realized, they saw what Minneapolis did and were like, oh, we can do that too. And are just doing it to do it.
And just doing it to do it. And that doesn't, I mean, I want fundamentally it to be about something that has meaning.
Yes.
But you know, what I was thinking about this week, I've gotten some emails because people knew that we were doing intro to prep week, right? And they're like going, God, you know, I'm so scared. Part of me is like, am I ready? Do I have to, like, I kind of want to just leave, you know, and I want to just go out and build a place and be there and kind of make my own life, you know? And I'm like going, well, we have like the perfect people for you on this week. You guys got to pay attention.
Well, because I do think it's important. One thing that I believe as a foundation of freedom is self-sustainability. Okay?
Right.
That's the number one thing for me that equals freedom. If you have self-sustainability, you have freedom, because then you don't have to depend on governments or organizations or other people. You depend on you because you've created that self-sufficiency circle. And so that's what the number one thing is for me. So I think a lot of people who now are exploring those ideas and are now thinking about it, we're going to have a lot of information for you even coming up later tonight. We have the North Star Permaculture Institute and Green Guild coming on to talk about how we can. So after we talk about, you know, tiny home living, sustainable living, creating your place to live, how do we now turn it into a permaculture like oasis? So after tonight, people should be like really ready and be pros.
So we're hoping that we can give them the tools to start coming up with their own plan, and that way they can like put it together, because people do it. It's doable, guys. So
uncertainty for people equals fear. So if you don't have a plan and you're not certain on what you're doing, it creates a lot more confusion and chaos. So if you come up with a plan or a rough outline, and then always have, you know, for plan B and C, but have a rough outline, it gives you a place to start to figure out what fits for you. And it may not look the same for everyone, but it can look, you can make it to where you find your best life and also find that freedom through it.
I love it. So on that note, I think I'm going to bring in our special guests for the show, fabulous tiny house experts, Laura LaVoie and Matt. Hi, guys.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello. I'm so thrilled that you can be on the show today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Well, you were the first people I thought of when I was like, do preparedness week. I was like, well, who do we talk to? I was like, I was like, Heather knows these amazing people. And I saw you guys at the Minnesota Libertarian Convention.
Yeah, goodness. That was several years ago. That was a great time. We really enjoyed, you know, sharing basically how to build your own house, you know, to give people an opportunity to build for freedom.
That was one of the tracks I sat in on because I was very interested about like how just all that was working. And, you know, just I was coming into my own freedom journey at that point and just, you know, researching these things. And so it was just very interesting to me to start. I've always thought about it, but, you know, where do you even start? I think that's like for a lot of people right now who maybe aren't on the preparation train, haven't really been into that or any off-grid or self-sufficient, anything, you know, I think the hardest thing is, well, how can I do it?
Yeah, I think it's different for everybody. You know, we came at it from a very specific place. We were interested in several different facets of independence, whether it was financial independence, learning how to do the things for ourselves so that we didn't feel like we lived in a house that we understood nothing about. So we wanted to learn how to build, and we wanted to do all of that. But we also, and because financial independence was a part of it, we wanted to keep the costs very low. So we built our house ourselves, and that's the reason why it's a tiny house. I mean, we don't always say this at the tiny house things we speak at. I love tiny houses very much, but that wasn't necessarily the main goal. The main goal was to build a structure that we built ourselves with our own hands that was, you know, as sustainable as possible. And Tiny house happened in part because we didn't want to be overwhelmed trying to build the thing. We didn't want to get into this big house or a bigger house and get a little over our heads. So we figured if we kept it tiny, we could do it. And so for us, those were some of the reasons. But everybody has their own reasons. You bring up a great point. Where to start? You can't just dive in and start building tomorrow if you haven't laid the foundation. So you have to think about what this means to you. What that sort of independence means to you and what the necessities are. You're not going to do it perfectly, so don't worry about that. But whatever it means to you, start laying those things and building those bricks. And if learning how to grow food is a part of it, do that while you're learning how to do this and that and put all those pieces together. You're never going to be 100% ready, but I wouldn't just say, hey, tomorrow I'm going to go start to build a house out in the woods, because that could also go wrong.
Or wait on the sideline until, I decide, I'm going to wait for that opportunity to show up.
Absolutely. I talk about that a lot, that you have to know why you want to build. That's really important. But once you get that comfort level, once you kind of figure out what it is you want to build, why you want to build it, then you really need to just start building it. You can read so many books, you can learn the techniques, all of that, but at some point you've got to hammer and nail some wood together and build yourself a house. And that's why in our story, it actually took us several years to build the house, because we learned every aspect of it as we went. So we were building, because of circumstances, we were building mostly on weekends because we had to travel to where we were building. So we would actually start, okay, we need to learn how to do a foundation. This weekend, we do the foundation. And then when we would go back to where we were living, we would learn the next thing. And then we would go do that thing. So it took us more years than we thought it would to build, but that helped get us rolling. It helped get us, so we felt pretty comfortable with each stage of the process as we were building.
What do you think was the most challenging to learn? I'm echoey.
No, it's fine.
Yeah,
we'll get it together. It's live.
We're good.
The most challenging component. There were different challenges to a number of the different pieces, but the foundation that was the first. Our house is on the side of a mountain, so it's the ground is very slopey. The ground at the front edge of the house, even though the house is only 16 feet long, is about 4 feet higher than the back. So we had to plan for that, and never having built a house and not wanting it to go sliding down the mountain, ideally, we had to take that into account. And that was, so the foundation, it's on post and piers, and so there's big concrete piers that are in the ground. You have to put them a certain amount of depth in the ground, depending on where you're at. We had to figure all that out. We had to figure out how to keep it level. We had to level it in 3 dimensions and get all that going. And that was probably the most challenging part. And it was good that once that was over, we felt like we really could do anything. And I know Laura writes about the actual story of doing the foundation, which is pretty funny because it was a bit of a mess. But as it turns out now, I mean, the house, that was 13 years ago. And the house has not shifted at all, which is, surprising to me. It didn't.
Well, it's on a mountain, so I'm just like, wow.
Yeah.
But yeah, once we did that and we knew we could do that because it was so hard, that everything else felt, even if it was difficult, it felt a lot easier. So, for us, it helped that we had that big project at the start to kind of convince us that we could actually do this.
Yeah.
I love that. I see Scarlett came back.
Yeah, I don't know what happened, and then I'm having personal technical difficulties over here. So I'm trying to enjoy my wine, and then I'm just spilling on myself and just things.
These aren't problems. These are just things that happen. I was just gonna say, for Matt and Laura to be here, I have a coffee bender from Surly in your honor.
Local.
It's local Minnesota and is quite delicious. And I drink this in your honor, my friends.
Yeah,
awesome.
As you know, we've enjoyed all the time we've spent in Minnesota visiting on our various visits, and Surly is definitely one of our favorites. It's really good beer.
Yeah, we miss that we can't get it down south very often, so
I will tell you a secret. I miss it too, and I don't live that far from it.
Oh, you can't get it? They don't have it at like your liquor stores and stuff? Like I can go to any liquor store around me and get it.
I don't know about Surly though. That's kind of like regional, don't you think?
Yeah.
Maybe a specialty beer store down at, I mean, like in your neck of the woods, they might have it. Kind of West Coast, not West Coast, East Coast, the other coast, the other one.
Yeah, Cotes de Roses. So.
Oh, that looks lovely.
Wait. Fancy bottle. Yeah, look at the top.
Yeah.
It looks
That's
like you're
fancy.
like drinking Cristal or something.
Yeah, it's got like
that's
yeah,
super
wow, that's
fancy.
crystal. Yeah. So I was like, I'm gonna use this later for tinctures and stuff and like cleaning vinegars and things.
I would totally. What does it taste like? Is it kind of? It's
a Grenache, Syrah, and Salt blend. So Cotes de Roses is usually, or they have Coteron, which is usually a red. It's kind of a blend. It's just like we throw stuff together.
That looks yummy.
You know, actually, one of our mutual LP friends was eating this with a steak one night, and I was like, I'm going to need that. Because it was Mother's Day. And I was like, where did you get that? Because I think I need that for Mother's Day. And so that's how it happened. So
I love that. And one of these days, I'll have to ask you about how your smoking adventures with your new smoker is going, because my husband likes that too. I'm sorry, I've been
smoking all the meats. It's important. Yes. And now I work at a farm too, so I get access to a lot of like organic pasture raised like pork and beef, and so there's lots of smoking that can be happening.
Yes,
which I think is important. Now, one thing I wanted to talk to you guys about was you mentioned location, how you were building off site, right? Why didn't you want to necessarily be around your location at the time? And what made you choose the location that you did? And how did you kind of go through that process? Like, did you just know where you were going to go? Or did you use a realtor? Did you know of land? Just how did you get into that?
Yeah. So our house is because it's on a foundation. We knew wherever we were going to build, we would have to build it in place because we were doing, especially since we were doing it ourselves, so we couldn't, with a modular situation, we could have it shipped in. But even where our house sits in the land, that would have been impractical. So we knew we wanted it to be in the woods. Well, another thing was we just liked the woods, and I wanted to be, we wanted to be enveloped in the woods, and so we knew we'd be building on site. At the time, we were when we were figuring out, we were living in Atlanta. But we had decided that where we really wanted to be was the area around in Western North Carolina, around in the general vicinity of Asheville. And that was important to us. We love the mountains there, and we had decided that was the place. But we also had a very finite budget. So it was a bit of that kind of started, all these different factors started to kind of shape what our search would look like. And that's how we arrived at what we actually needed to do to start the practical search. And that was me about a year before we bought the land, starting to go from Asheville and drive off in various directions on weekends and figure out what areas sort of, seem like they might work, from all the aspects you can think of, whether, was the price all right? Could I build this thing without the neighbors, coming and running me out of the place, or all these other things? And all these pieces started to fit. And after about 9 months of looking, we did actually reach out to a realtor so that we could we had never bought raw land before. So, kind of get some support there. And we found one that was very unconventional, which was awesome because he kind of got what we were going for in his own way, and then led us on some crazy land searches for the next 3 months.
Oh yeah. Some of the land searches were hilarious. I could write a book just about that. But I mean, there were times when he would just drive us up a mountain, no road, no nothing. We were just going, and we're like, are we going to die? And then we'd get out of the car and we'd pull out a machete, and we're like, yes, we are going to die.
Oh Lord.
That's interesting because we here at Freedom Revolution want to eventually open up Freedom Revolution Network properties, where we would work with realtors and people to help raw land search or kind of like turnkey off-grid properties. And so that's one of my dreams of mine, is to try to streamline that process for people, to maybe have like one agency that specializes in this type of thing for people, because it's a growing genre and many people are, turning to these lifestyles, whether it's with tiny homes on wheels or even RV living. The paradigm is shifting for what a traditional home looks like.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think there is space for that. I think there's a huge need. And when we speak with people, one of the things that really holds people back is they don't feel like there is somebody that they go to that has done it before, where they'll feel like they can actually do it. So I think just having somebody doing that or moving toward that will give people that confidence. I think that's awesome. It's a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We just figured we'd partner with local realtors and then use, have them give us the listings of the land, and then maybe we could get a commission if we end up selling it. But really what it was about was, because we know what we want and what our listeners would want and what people would want in off-grid properties, we could then help comb these properties and find, so that you're not ending up in some of these scam positions that a lot of people are in, that we hear about, land bait and switch. Those things are really concerning for people. And I get why that is probably a hesitation for people to want to jump into this lifestyle. Just because there is a lot of logistics that you do have to figure out. What does it look like? Just even you guys traveling back and forth to build. I'm sure that there were times where you're like, I don't know if I want to go back to that property, and you just frustration at times, and just the way things work, that you have to get through that ebb and flow to make it to the other side. But I think the change for people is the hardest part, because myself included, I've been trying to get myself out and on some land forever, and I'm still 10 years in this apartment. So,
well, and I was thinking about the fact that the community law problem, a lot of communities have laws set up to stop people from building tiny homes.
True.
And that is a very complicated aspect of it. Matt and Laura, what do you think about that, with the laws that are for and against, well, mostly against tiny houses?
Yeah, that's actually something we've been working toward for a very long time. Pretty much as soon as we moved into our tiny house, we started working with an organization in Asheville that eventually got called the Asheville Small Home Advocacy Committee, which is SHAC for short, because you got to have a good acronym. But the whole idea was, we had so many amazing benefits from building our own tiny house that it felt incredibly unfair to us that more people didn't have an easy avenue to do it, and a legal avenue to do it. Because sure, you could just buy some land, build a house, and not tell anybody about it, but you don't always have that comfort level if that's what you do, because somebody could come take it from you at any point. So we started this organization to work with the city to try to change laws around small and tiny houses. And we were working within the city, but even places outside of any given city, to create an avenue and a pathway to do it. Because I think that so many of the laws surrounding zoning and building and things like that are so restrictive that they block out everything other than a traditional single family home, or whatever the development opportunities are. And why would you have to build a multi-family unit apartment when you could change that into a cottage development where everybody has their own home, so they're not sharing walls, they feel ownership. So there's so many other ways we can do it that
would be empowering for many communities who have issues with housing disparities, much like the gentrification of them burning down this building in Minneapolis. If they would allow tiny home shelters or places or groups or pods that they would allow in certain areas, we could alleviate a lot of the pressure on housing. Truly. And they can have their own. And then, like you said, when they create a sense of ownership, people then honestly want to put everything into it. When they feel like they have a sense of pride and they're a part of it and they're a part of things that are happening, that energy is expended. And usually in good deeds and sowing, it's like planting a seed.
That's
and
right.
So I think that a lot of these policies are restrictive by design, but yet when they build like new developments, they make apartments smaller than ever and more tiny than ever. But yet they're refusing to let that piece of liberty, because then I think they realize that people will wake up and then see that they can have freedom right at their fingertips, and it's very attainable and it's easy. And that's not what they want people. They don't want people to do that. They want them to live off the nanny state. And And it's unfortunate, but I think people have had the revolution. I know so many people who live in bus homes, you know, and they drive all around and they live in a bus and they love it. And it's the space isn't an issue. They've created a life for themselves now that they feel empowered, that they're out there doing things in the community. We're more a part of communities that they're not necessarily tied to than ever before. So I think, you know, even with tiny homes, the one thing that I can say with tiny homes, the amount of variety and creativity is next level. I mean, you could call it like the renaissance of art, you know what I mean? But like in building
and housing,
like so much innovation in there, like what people put in, and if do they want passive solar, or do they want, you know, just even decorations or certain storage that I've seen that have just like floored me, that I'm like, oh, that's smart. That's smart.
Yeah. Absolutely. You know, design has always been a huge part of the tiny house movement. The person who's kind of considered the grandfather of the modern tiny house movement, Jay Schaefer, he wasn't an architect. He was an artist, and he designed his, at the time, 89 square foot house. So it wasn't necessarily architecturally, you know, what we would expect a house to be, because he didn't have to work within those rules, because he was building usable art. And that kind of launched from there. And the best part about it, like you said, is that every single tiny house is unique. And we have so many friends. One of my favorite parts about being in the tiny house community is the tiny house community. So we have friends who live all over the country, and every house is different, and they all have such cool things going on, and you know, the way they live and their resources, and everyone can make that individual choice for themselves. So your house is custom to you. Whatever it is you want, it's yours, and it's how you live in it that matters.
Yeah, and I think, Scarlett, you mentioned the freedom aspect of it, and I think those things go hand in hand. I think when people feel more free, they become more able to express their creativity, and that's how you get, you know, being able. And it's a shame that we live in a way that most people feel that in their normal lives they can't express that creativity, and that their living space can't reflect that creativity that they feel. You would think that that should be a pretty fundamental thing about, if you're going to live in a place, that place should be an expression of yourself in one way or another, and you should be able to do that. But I don't think we feel that way all the time, because we're told that that's just not something you worry about. You worry about just these things. You worry, you know, you go to work, you do this and that, and all your time's taken up, so you can't do that. When you start to take a step back, and maybe you get into a living situation where you don't have the costs associated with a larger home and such, you can expend some of that time thinking about, well, what does a house that works for me look like? And I think that's why you see some of that expression in those houses, and hopefully we see more of that. I think no matter what size house, because I mean, we're not, like I said, we definitely don't believe tiny houses are the only way to get housing freedom. I mean, whatever your idea of a house is, it should work for you, right? I mean, yeah.
But I think tiny houses are unique in the fact that you can move with them at times if you like, if you're not on a foundation. You can customize them very easy. They become kind of like a plug and play type of idea for people, where you can modulate them. You can add on to them if you wanted to. You know, the possibilities are endless in those things. I've seen even people make setups where, like, if they have children, they'll build like a deck in between the tiny homes that are each on their own area. You know, I've seen just an amazing amount of variety that it can be small. A tiny home can be small. It can be, you know, like 900 square feet, and it can be, you know, teeny tiny, like you said, 89 square feet. It depends on your comfortability. You know, I think one thing nice about COVID is it's shown people like what you actually need and what you don't, like what's wanted and like what's actually needed. And I think that that's a process that you go through, especially if you even move to an RV or go off grid or tiny homes. You go through that process of having to let go of all the things you take, because you can't take everything in a typical home into your tiny home. That's just, it's not going to work. So it makes you have to make those decisions of what's truly essential in my life, what's important to me, what do I want included in my home, what do I don't, because honestly, I just don't have the space for it. Not that I don't want these things. And I think that starts making you think about your situation in a different way and starts making you process the things that happen to you in a different way, where you're not necessarily in the consumerism of everything. You're in, how does this benefit me and my family and my life, more so than am I purchasing this to be a good consumer?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's, that is definitely at the root of why we did it. No matter what, and all the other things that happen. I mean, for us, this is every year it gets a little different because we're 13 years into it now, and so it's meant so many different things in our lives over the years. But the one thing that is true is that it has made every choice since then, wherever possible. In this, we realize that this is also, we're fortunate to be in this situation to be able to do this. Not everyone can. But it's given us the ability to be deliberate about every choice that we make in our living. Why are we doing this? Do we need to buy this thing? Does that help our lives or not? And not to just do things because we feel we need to. So yeah, I think that being able to live more deliberately was key in the beginning, and 13 years later, it remains just as important. And now we've taken that concept to ideally pretty much everything we do. Like, is this what we want to do right now? And yeah, we feel extremely grateful that we're able to do that, and that it's led to several things, including and after the time.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. That was one of the things that I just really thought about, when I think about, because it's something that I aspire to do. I want to live in an RV and travel. I want to go do mobile news. That's my real dream, is to get an RV and travel and go hit the news.
That's awesome. Yes. I love that idea.
Yes,
I love that.
Wants to come with me too. So. Yeah, come on. Oh yeah, you can come too. Come on. Yeah, let's go.
Let's go. It'd be radical.
It would be radical. We could be like, she's calling it like the Wonderland bus. So I mean, we can be like,
we can do like
Wonderland experience.
Drive around the country, do documentaries. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, go talk to people, just show people and bring ideas to people, share ideas, bring ideas to people. That's what this is all about. That's why we have you here today, is to try to explain to people that a tiny home isn't daunting. It's not something overwhelming, only if you make it. And a lot of our blocks are in our mind. It's not because it's actually there. There are ways to make bare bones. A lot of people now are buying those sheds, like those rent-to-own sheds.
Oh yeah,
and they're a couple $1,000.
I mean, you can do anything with your space. I mean, that's amazing. The amazing part of tiny houses, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's like a little, I hate to say this, but it's like a little dollhouse. It's like your adult-sized dollhouse that you get to fit with all the things on. And it is. Like, I used to live this as a little girl. So that got me jazzed when I thought about tiny homes. That's kind of what it is. Like your
I got some really cool pictures that Laura sent me and Laura Matt sent me. I want to just share them real quick, and we'll take a look at them and talk about them a little bit. If that sounds okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is Matt and Laura in their tiny house, obviously.
That is us.
It is a beautiful house. I actually got the opportunity to come and visit, and it is lovely. It's just very homey and wonderful. And Matt actually does play guitar. It's not just for show in the picture. So
it's true. Although I wasn't just spontaneously playing the guitar when this was for a story that there was a magazine that came out and did a story, and they had me play the guitar. So I wasn't just spontaneously sitting around playing guitar when the photographer happened to come. They did the interview for the show, and then they said, "Could you play the guitar or something?" So this is a staged photo for that show at the request of the photographer. I don't always just sit around and play the guitar in my time.
Really? I'm kind of disappointed.
Right?
Sometimes we do.
Sometimes I do. Sometimes
right?
I do.
I was thinking campfire, kumbaya, that type of deal.
Exactly.
There's some of that.
Okay, good. All right, at least we get some of that.
It's actually quite spacious. I mean, I just think it's neat because you can get everything that you need in this. This is 120 square feet, which is also the name of their website, which I'll share later. But it's actually kind of amazing, all the stuff that you have in here.
Yeah, I mean, anything you need. There's a bathroom. I'm sitting at the table, which is both a desk and our dining table. We have a sofa, and we've got some more pictures. We actually redesigned. We changed it up a little later, but we have a kitchen. We have an outdoor kitchen. We have the loft. I mean, everything, and closets, everything you could possibly need are in this house.
I'm going to come back and forward on this, but like here's the kitchen, and I just think it actually works really well because you're very organized.
The L-shaped kitchen lets you go kind of all around, but then have to, more than one person, so you're not just like, boom, get out of my way in the kitchen, because that's
right.
You didn't want the tiny house, but do we have to be like tiny together, can't cook? Like, I don't think so.
Exactly. And we just painted the tiny house last summer. So, it's all of the wooden side from that first picture, but then last summer, just to brighten it up, we took some white paint to the walls and painted the entire, ground level. And we got a new couch. We got a new blanket. So, that's the thing. A tiny house doesn't, just like any house, just like any size house, it doesn't have to be static. Like we built it. We started building it 13 years ago. And last summer we're like, let's paint it. And so we did.
I like that.
I like that. Just opening up your space, just changing things just for even physical, mental well-being, like, hey, let's just change what it looks like, so that we break it up. So it's not just the same thing every time.
Exactly.
It's a fabulous couch. This is the old couch?
Oh yeah, that's our new sofa. I'm very
I like
so
that.
Thanks. Our original sofa we actually built. Yeah, it's very comfortable too. We actually built our original sofa, which was in the first picture, and it wasn't perfect, and we never really loved it. So one of the things we did last summer was, this one. As you can see, it's just made out of 2x4s and like a futon that we bolted to the 2x4s. But it was never great. It was never perfect. And again, you don't have to have the same things for the rest of your lives. So we shopped around. We found the perfect size new futon to put in there. And yeah, it's perfect for lounging, sitting, all of the above. You can move, the arms kind of move, so you can lay them flat or move them up. So it was perfect.
Well, it looks like you could have a guest over too.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's nice. Because, you think about that too. People think, oh, well, I go to a tiny home and I can never have a guest. But there are a lot of beds and ways, and even maybe like a Murphy bed that you could pop out or roll away underneath. Or there's a lot of different, even a blow-up mattress if you have enough, footage on the floor. There's ways to make it work so that you can have, people have like, oh,
absolutely.
Now you're recluse, it's like, no.
Exactly. That's actually a big thing that people talk about a lot. Oh, I can't live in a tiny house because I can never have people over. We've had one person stay in our tiny house on the sofa, and it was fine. But we also, because we have a lot of land, we've got several acres, we have friends come and camp all the time, especially when we were building. We did it constantly.
We had a friend. I had a friend that was doing some work in Western North Carolina for his job for a whole summer, and his place was paying him to stay in a hotel, but he was going to be hanging out with us most weekends anyway. So what he would do was he would stay in the hotel during the week, check out on Friday, pocket the money for the weekend, and come and pitch a tent. We just pitched a tent for him when he was coming up on our land, and we wound up leaving it there most of the summer actually. And he would sleep in a tent in our land, and that way he kept the hotel money for those days for those.
And that's ways to do it. And I think it's just people have to be willing and able to do those things too. A lot of people are like, oh no, I can't do that. But further, a lot of people find this type of life, whether it's camping, tiny homes, off-grid living, they find that sense of freedom that you're like, I don't have to pay $80 for a hotel. There's no, why waste that time just to go in, go to sleep, get out, use all of their amenities that end up getting washed, or, if you're thinking about environmental impacts, wasting that just to literally sleep.
Exactly.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, we definitely want to reinforce that. Yeah, people can do this. There is nothing special about us in that regard. We did this ourselves. The whole house was built ourselves. And it's been there in one part or another for almost 13 years now, and it's doable. It's hard, but it's doable. You can do it. You can learn as you go along. And people are going to have varying degrees of success. Some people are going to go way beyond what we did. I think some people sometimes get intimidated or maybe just decide that since they can't make their house as beautiful as the ones on the TV shows now that have popped up about tiny houses and all that and I think that's a false bar to be setting for yourself. You're building a house so that you can be free. You're not building something that's going to be in Better Homes and Gardens or whatever. It's it may or may not look like that. If it does, that's great. If it doesn't, you still have a house that you built yourself that's meaningful to you, and you can do it. It is accessible. It's just some people's are going to turn out better than others. Ours is not, especially since it was one of the earlier ones. Ours is not in the top 20 of my favorite tiny houses, but I like it. But I still love it because it's my house and I built it, and it was pretty cheap.
Right, and I think it's important to know too. We didn't have any real building experience before we started doing this. We'd done like household projects like anybody, but we never built anything before. We learned how to do it and we did it.
And what kind of tools did you use? Did you read books? Were you watching like YouTube videos? Did you know people at tiny homes? How did that process kind of go about? Because, you say like, oh, we did it ourselves, but there does come the work to learn how to make that function so that, your house doesn't cave in or, you have a steady roof or, those type of things. So how did you come about that?
One of the reasons that it took so long is because there weren't as many. Now there are some great videos by some incredible builders that are wonderful and explain it very well. Those weren't necessarily out there. So we networked with some people that we could and got advice various ways. There were a lot of, the most direct information was probably through like picture slideshows of people that did that at the time, because it's back, 2008 or so. And YouTube was a thing. It wasn't, there wasn't anywhere near.
Nearly tiny home videos. It's like cat videos.
Yeah, it was mostly cats. It was all cats at the time. And so, and so we did that. We networked, but then, a lot of books. I had gone to a couple of building seminar, like Teach Yourself to Build Different Sustainable Type Buildings, cordwood masonry and earth ships out in the desert in New Mexico and other things. So because I had always had an interest in that. So that gave me a little bit of skills to build off of. And then talking with other people, but then taking our time and going and as far as tools, conventional power tools, we had, miter saw, table saw, battery powered saws. For the power saw, since we don't have conventional power at our land, we bought a small generator that actually is still running to this day. It's amazing. That we use for those things, but otherwise the house is all solar now, but we ran our power tools off of a generator.
Mm-hmm. Which is smart for off-grid. We go boom back. So we just bring a battery with us and we run all of our things off of a battery and an inverter, and then we plug our stuff into there and it's fine. And everybody's like, how do you go camping without electricity? I'm like, but is it camping? I don't feel like it's camping at that point once we use electricity.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's easy to be, off grid, but find other ways, run tools. I have used my hair straightener in my camper in the middle of nowhere when we were going to like the casino somewhere that you could camp at. And I'm like doing my hair and my makeup in the camper, and I'm coming out like, and no electricity. Those things aren't always needed. Red, one of our hosts here on the Freedom Revolution Network, she lives in Colorado in the San Luis Valley. And she's completely off-grid, no electricity, no running water. She lives in a camper, and she decided that for herself to create freedom for herself. And it's been a journey for her as well. That's why her show is called Journey into Freedom. That was literally what it was about. That's why she started it, was to just kind of document what she was doing as she moved out to Colorado, got on her own, went off-grid, and it started these changes. And I think that if people feel like there's something missing in their lives, or that, the daily monotonous grind isn't working for them, tiny homes or off-grid living or sustainability might be something to look into. That's where you maybe could find your passion. You maybe could find interest in it, even if you don't take it, to the extreme. But there are ways that you can small move, and that's what permaculture is about. You can make small moves to try to create that closed loop chain of sustainability. So whatever that looks like for you. But I think that the one thing is you might just, if you're thinking about it, I suggest people to at least maybe look at some land, see cost in your area, maybe look at a few different areas to see discrepancies in price. Then maybe start looking at, would you want to build fully from hand? Or would you be using one of these prefab buildings that they have now that you honestly could make something work till you can figure something else out? It's all about people's comfortability levels that I think are waning back now, that people don't necessarily feel like they need all this cushy, opulence, that they can remove these things down to a simple, basic level, and it makes them happy, and it brings them pure joy.
Absolutely. I will. I'm going to share a little bit about. Laura came up with a book that I think is amazing, and it covers a lot of the ideas that they're talking about, and their journey and things that you might want to think about if this is something of interest to you. So I'm going to share that, and at the end of the show, I'll flash it up on the screen, but I'm also going to put it on the Freedom Revolution Network page and also in our comments here, so you can see the book itself. I bought. She had another book too. I'm like, you didn't send it to me, but I'm like, they're both very good, and like they talk about wonderful like things to think about when you're planning this and your experience. So I think it's like you could read this whole book and go, oh my God, I have so many more questions than what we've asked today, because it is off the hook. When you see what they built in person, it is super impressive and beautiful. I mean, the pictures don't even do it justice. Those are very nice pictures.
You can tell that there's a craftsmanship there that was developed. You know, you guys got your own personal style, what you thought worked, what you liked, what you didn't. What made you choose a loft rather than any other style of bedroom or any other design? What made you choose the square footage you did? That's a good question too.
Simplicity. It was absolutely simplicity. We knew we were going to be figuring it out as we went along. I wanted to keep the roof line simple, and that was a large part of it. Why it's that shape. It's 8x16 because that was it's easy to buy lumber for that, and you have to do a minimal amount of cutting. And the foundation plans that I had worked that's doable worked out with that size. So it was mostly simplicity. We wanted a very simple design. We did buy plans from the early incarnation of the Tumbleweed Tiny House Company, and we modified them a little, but that was one of the more simple and straightforward shapes that they had. So it was all what we thought we could do, not knowing what we're doing and wanting to be able to jump into it. I mean, like I said, we did some research, but knowing we needed to start. You mentioned people are willing to pull back a little on the opulence they require now, and that's, I think, true. And I personally, I hope to see more of that, because that was one of the things that finally pushed us over that hump when we were building. It was right around the time of the 2008 stock market crash, and everybody was worried that the economy, no one was ever going to have a job again, and it was all that stuff. Some of the same stuff we're hearing now, and who knows? You know, I certainly don't, but it was that kind of thing. Like, we definitely felt that very deeply. We really took a look in ourselves and said, what do we need? We don't need these bigger and bigger houses. We don't need this bigger house that we were living in at the time. What we want instead is to be able to have the freedom to make those choices. So yeah, I do think that I think that's a great point, and I personally, I think that's a good thing that can come out of a pretty terrible situation like COVID, is that if it really makes people think about what's important, and I think a lot of people would find that probably they can live a little more simply.
Well, we're going to see a lot of evictions. We're going to see a lot of people put out of their homes here pretty soon. And so I think that why we are making this program right now too is maybe if somebody gets kicked out of their home during this time and they don't have options, or they're trying to think of what they could maybe do, this could be maybe something achievable or attainable for them. And it can be if you just put your mind to it and try to do it. Like you said, you did it with simple cuts. You picked the right wood, so you didn't have to cut, and measure and make sure it was perfect. You picked the roof pitch you did because it was the easiest to put together, that you knew could make work, and that you didn't have to worry about your house collapsing. You know, just simple things that makes your life a little bit easier, where you don't want to make it. You can make it complicated. Absolutely. You can make it as intricate as possible. But I think a part of this lifestyle, what people are drawn to is the simplicity, is the easy-going nature of it. So you don't want to necessarily create something bigger than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Simple is good. And yeah, if it means, you know, in some cases, especially in situations where there's an immediate financial need, if people get evicted, yeah, maybe that is a case where it does make sense to, if they have some skills or ability, you know, or desire to learn a little bit of handiwork, maybe that is a case where you go get the Home Depot shed or whatever and put it in somebody's backyard and do it. I mean, it's,
exactly.
You know,
you've got to start somewhere with these people, and I think the tiny home community, one thing that's nice and that we've talked about is it's diverse. From the smallest, little capsule pods that people live in, that, even that are like little travel trailers that people live in, and they even live in them in the woods and places, to the granddaddy tiny homes that I like to call, that are like basically like not destination trailers, but like park models, basically.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Got up to that level. There's everything in between. So I think the nice thing is you can customize it to your family. Families can also do this. I know a lot of people question, can families do this? And it is going to be a sacrifice as a family. But what I can say is I do know a few people who embrace that living with children, and it's easily attainable. You just find out a little bit different ways of doing things, and maybe storing their toys or items or those type of things will really be the biggest challenges for families and children, rather than the actual living experience. Because if you find, they've said it in studies, and I don't actually remember what the exact quote was, but like most people only spend time in like one room of their home anyway. Like they spend
exactly
such a small amount of time, like in their whole house, and they're always in like the same room and the same amount of square footage all the time anyway. So people don't realize you're not even utilizing most of your home anyway. What are you paying for? What are you heating? What are you, and those type of things too. Those costs. What do you guys do for heating? Do you guys have wood stove? Or what do you got going on?
It was designed with a wood stove in mind. We never implemented the wood stove because we found that we didn't want to give up the square footage to put it, even the ones on the wall take up a decent amount of space because you have that clearance. So we actually have a propane heater so we do use some propane, but it uses such a very small amount, and because it's in North Carolina and it's so tiny. So we do have propane, and we've experimented with some other things, and we have other ideas that we may try at different times for some other unconventional options, but propane in general, it works. And then everything else is electric off the solar. We don't have a conventional refrigerator. That was a trade-off that we made, but we have a thermoelectric cooler that is not the kind you can buy in stores now. It runs off a very small, efficient engine that uses very little power and can run off our solar panels. So that cooler is where we put things that need to be cooled. They stopped making them. They were very efficient. It runs off something called the Stirling engine. If anybody wants to Google that. But they stopped making them because they're expensive to manufacture, and so they weren't able to get the profits they can off these ones that you plug in the walls now. But I found one at a truck stop in a corner because they had been being sold to truckers because they could run off very little power, so they could run them while they were driving across the country. And I found it for. Yeah, I found it it was super cheap. It was like a quarter of the price it normally would have been, so I bought it, and it's been our refrigerator now for 12 years.
Right.
Dang, that's lucky.
Yeah. Yeah, that was very weird because absolutely, because it was exactly what I wanted, but I didn't think I'd ever find one, and there it was, because you can buy them used sometimes, but and
it was dusty on the shelf, like nobody had touched them for years, so we actually wish now we had bought all of them.
Yeah.
So.
I know, because now you'll never find them again.
Right.
Yeah. So that was but the systems. Yeah. So propane for the heat. We do not obviously have air conditioning. We use some permaculture techniques in looking at the airflow and convection down the mountain. Our house is situated to allow the cool air as it comes down the mountain through the house, which actually does work pretty well. And then plus we have a canopy of trees over the house, and mostly. Which makes the solar a little more challenging, but we did it on purpose. It was very purposeful. We didn't want to be overheated. We knew that would be a challenge. So we found an area where we did have some sun that we could maintain, a clearing enough to get solar to the solar panels, which is, like I said, that's where we get all our electricity from. That system is absolutely overachieved. I did not expect it to be working this many years later, but it still works. And then I thought the panels and the batteries would go long before anything else, but actually our inverter broke last summer, and that was the first thing. And the inverter inverters are a dime a dozen, so I was happy that was what broke. I was like, well, that's better than that. Yeah, so yeah.
Hell yeah.
That's wonderful. When you really think about that, and I know a lot of people too, like my aunt and uncle, they live off the grid technically, They live in a home, but they live off propane. All propane appliances, they are not on the electricity grid at all. And so there are many ways that I don't think people are aware of, even for, tiny homes and RVs. If you have a little bit more space, you could do something like a propane electric, or there's all different types of ways to maintain cooling. Red only uses a cooler. That's what Red uses. Red is for 5 years used a cooler, and that's all she's got, and she keeps all her food cold, and she's just fine.
Yeah.
So it's what you can be willing to make work, and I think one of the things that's beautiful about the tiny home community is the ingenuity. Watching people come up with these ideas and just watching them find their own place in this world, right? Because I think that's a hard thing for people. We walk through this life and we're like, who are we? What are we doing here? But if you can find, and living is such an integral part of us that I think that's where it comes from, because life is, right?
Yeah, I always want to mention, because our house, we're off the grid. Our house is very simple. And people always ask, well, do I have to live like that if that's how I live tiny? And like you said before, there's so many ways to live tiny. So I always like to mention 2 friends of ours, 2 different tiny houses. Our friend Jewel has a tiny house. Her website is My Gypsy Soul, and hers is freaking luxury. It has every amenity you could imagine. It is totally fantastic. And that's kind of what she says. And she's been on HGTV and she's done all that stuff. She's like, you don't have to live off grid if you don't want to. Here, let me show you what I did. And it's amazing. And then you mentioned with kids, our friend Macy Miller and her partner, and they have 2 kids. And the kids were actually both born while they were living in the tiny house. And I think the oldest is 7 now. They've been living in the tiny house or traveling full time. They also have a Great Dane, a hamster, and a cat.
Yes.
All in like 280 square feet, I think, is their house. So yeah, if you think you can't do it with kids, you absolutely can do it with kids. And those kids in particular, they've never known anything else. So
kids don't know any better.
They're not missing anything. Everyone thinks they're missing something, but those kids aren't missing anything.
Kids aren't missing anything right now. See, I think it's just all about perspectives and thinking about, what we actually need. And we were just kind of over pumped with that whole life and world that I think now it's kind of bringing people back down to earth. IKEA had an interesting exhibit for a few years where they showed different types of living in different amounts of square feet. I don't know if you ever saw that, Heather. They had it out in
That's so cool.
We did. We actually went to IKEA before we built the tiny house. We went and we hung out in some of those spaces just to see how small we could go.
Yeah. They had 4 different options that were no bigger, less than 500 square feet, I think was the thing. And they showed you how you could live and how you could have everything set up in these they had 470, 300, and then they had 100 and maybe probably about 120. And they showed you how you could live in each one of those. And they showed kids' rooms, they showed adults, and it even sparked my partner and I to be like, could we do this? Just even for cost-effective purposes.
Yeah.
With market rates of apartments and things for the square footage you get are astronomical. When you actually break it down to brass tacks, building your own or even living in a smaller space is more efficient. Even if you wanted to live in the smaller space to then buy a larger home, it still serves the purpose, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
You still got to get to your end goal, but you also got to experience something different and gain your freedom through that without bleeding out or switching loans or mortgages. I think it's been a way for people, especially financially, to break free from the grid. Not having to pay an electricity bill, not having to pay gas bill, not having to pay, all of these things that, trash and water and just all of these things that are hooked. I know, right? I know. I just reminded you of all your homeowner things that just made you sad. But those are the things you can leave behind. And that's why I think it's important. And I think people forget about that just even from a cost-effective point of view, it can also be used in times of emergency. If you have to live that way for a short amount of time to regain capital, it's a good idea.
It is a good idea.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We definitely We think about that. I mean, we have our tiny house, and different things in life have led us. Right now, we are clearly not in the tiny house as we're doing this.
See around us.
I believe that one thing, we try to organize our life such that one thing builds off the other and leads the other. So after doing some of all the work we were doing with tiny house legal issues and related things, I made the somewhat questionable decision to go to law school. And so I just finished my second year of law school in Atlanta. And so I have one more year to go. And so obviously we're starting to think about, I mean, everything we've done has been done somewhat unconventionally. So I imagine, especially since I'm in my mid-40s, I'm going to be a pretty unconventional new lawyer. And I don't expect to just, go working at the corporate job in New York City or whatever and go right to work for that. So one way that gives us the freedom to do that in a way that makes sense to us and that we can do meaningful work is because we know no matter what happens, we can live in that tiny house. I want to practice in the area near where it's at anyway. And actually last summer I had a legal job, and this is where I was going to bring it back around, because you never know when the structure is going to become incredibly useful in ways you didn't think of. Last summer I had a legal job in Asheville, North Carolina, and we were still paying rent for this apartment here, for my law school apartment. And we didn't know where we were going to live for my legal job, but of course we have the tiny house. So of course we lived in the tiny house, and so we lived in our off-the-grid tiny house where we carried our own water on our shoulders up the hill and all that stuff from our spring. But every morning I would put on a suit and go and walk down my hill, which is a quarter-mile path through the woods, to get my. I think we may or may not have mentioned. We probably mentioned years back when you saw us the first time that we do not have road access to our house. So you hike to our house up a mountain. And I did that in a suit every day last summer to go to my legal job. And it really, it was great. And it cost us nothing. It literally cost us nothing. I believe our property taxes are.
It allowed you to move forward. If you didn't have the option, if you didn't even think about, and that's something too, to be flexible. I think what you just said is really important about being flexible. Yes, you've lived in this tiny home. You've had it for 13 years. Yes, it is your dream. It is what you love. But when you made that life decision, you decided, no, I think this is time that we can go and rent an apartment. And I think it makes sense for what we're doing so that I can go to school effectively and I don't have to climb over a mountain every day to go to school. But then it also probably allowed you, even financially, because you had the tiny home, to then be like, you know what, we can give the extra money to rent an apartment at this time.
Oh, that's enormously important, right? That money in those 13 years that we didn't spend just on our living situation and trying to have bigger houses with more amenities and everything made a huge difference, without a doubt. There is no way that this would have been possible. There's no way I'd be in law school right now if it wasn't for the tiny house. And it all fits together. I mean, because it's one of the things that made me want to go to law school in the first place. I never thought I'd be doing this, even when we were living in the tiny house. But once I finished that, I was like, well, we did that. We can pretty much do anything. I guess I can do this, even in my 40s to go to law school. Sure, that sounds dumb. Let's do it. And we just did it.
No, it sounds like a new beginning. It sounds like that through the tiny home, it brought you to a passion that you didn't realize that you actually had. And that now has fueled you to move forward in the future to create even bigger and more beautiful things, and be there for people, and you want to be the change that you want to see, right? And so that's what you're doing. You're speaking your truth. You're out there. You're showing people how to walk the talk and speak your path. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And it shows people that no matter what, you can have options. I feel like people are feeling very pent in, and they feel like there's just nowhere to go. It's a very desperation situation. And I don't think it has to be that desperate for people. Mm-hmm. I think that you just got to step back and really think about, well, how can I do this? And unfortunately, if people don't know, the only way you can get through things is hard work. So with that being stated, it does suck to have uncomfortable feelings, but hard work is going to get you there. So there's a little bit of pushing forward. There's a little bit of belief, a little bit of afraid, but you've got to just go through it to then end up reaping the benefits. And I think that that's one, right? I think that that's one thing that people have kind of lost. We're used to instant society. We're used to instant gratification. We're used to instant. And then, now I have what I need, instead of Let's build the foundation. Let's work hard. Let's keep working. Let's keep building the levels so that everything's stable. So by the time I get to the top, I'm ready. Instead of I need to go start it from the bottom. Now we hear it as a drinker.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I absolutely, and yeah, that's I totally agree.
Yeah, it's just missing right now, and I hope that movements like this and freedom movements kind of bring that back to people and allows them to, hold that as a new coin in their toolbox. Because I just think we're missing that, and a lot of people are getting it. 25 million people now live in like the RV community.
Yeah.
It's a huge amount of people who are not living in traditional homes.
And I think, people don't realize that there's so many options. You don't have to just follow the one option where you have like the white picket fence house in the suburbs where you pay more than you make. You can do something else, and it's an amazing thing. And I feel like that. I think the hardship we're going to go through right now is going to open people's eyes.
Yeah,
and I think it's a good thing for everyone.
And something else doesn't have to be a tiny house. It can be, the one thing that every single tiny house person you will talk to, the entire movement will tell you, is it's not about the house. None of this is about the house. It's about the experience you have. It's about learning new things. It's about creating a different mindset, changing the way you live. It's never about the house. So whatever your change is, it doesn't have to be a tiny house. It can be anything.
I think it's more of a tiny house philosophy.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Rather than just, the house itself must be. But I think it's the philosophy of the tiny home where you come in, you try to curb all the things that you don't need. You try to quiet out the noise, find out what you actually need, and then embrace that and then build upon it.
Yep.
It's those quiet thoughts that, you don't necessarily pay attention to. It's the nuances, but they're there in this community that it's really about how people react to what they're given, but then also creating new shifts. One thing we've noticed in like tiny home communities too is a lot of solar has been implemented now.
Mm-hmm.
People are using passive solar and other forms of solar, rocket mast stoves. It's been amazing. Even earth ships, and earth bag homes, have even been built tiny style. It's been amazing to just see the amount of materials, the amount of work that's went into this, that it makes me now want to look into this. Now, earth ships have been one thing that I've always been interested in because I feel like for people and materials' sake, it's a easy way to potentially get in. We're using natural materials, and it can give you a small foundation, and it can give you something. And I think with minimal money, I think most are under $20,000 to build for earth ships if you really want to cut it bare bones. Which, when you think about for a home, that may sound like an astronomical amount of money, but when you think about even the rent you're paying every month or a mortgage,
so much
you're going to be up to that pretty soon, in a couple of years, really.
Very quickly. Yeah, earthships are such a great place to look at because they do. I mean, they handle every piece of what it is. That all the systems are there and everything else, and they're so beautiful. Like, that was definitely the thing that. One of the things that really got me excited about building something myself, even though I knew I probably wasn't going to build an earthship, at least right away. That was where I first learned about solar, was staying, and I went out to the Greater World Earthship community in Taos, New Mexico, and asked questions. And people
about an hour south of so like Red's up in the San Luis Valley there, about maybe like an hour from Durango. So she's like right in that area. So she's so it's same desert landscape, same type of thing. She's got the 14ers surrounding her, but it's the same type of area. So as far as building, they have a whole community over there that is built like earth ships, and they help each other build them. And I think that's one nice thing we've seen through this too, is the fellowship.
Yes.
Love that.
Yeah, and we try, and although our tiny houses tend to be separate from those of our friends, we've all, especially when we were, before I went to school, when we were speaking at tiny house events more often, when there'd be one in our town, people would show up. When we go to and stay, when we'd go speak out in other towns, we'd see what tiny house people were there and stay with them. I think anything that brings people together and you have that connection, it's great to be able to support one another. So yeah, I think that's wonderful. I think any movement.
You guys attend a lot of the tiny home festivals?
Yeah, we have. We haven't in the last couple of years just because of the whole law school situation. But yeah, I mean, we've been all over the country. We've been to Oregon for tiny house events. Obviously, throughout the Southeast, and we've been to ones in North and South Carolina and in Georgia. I've actually spoken at events in Virginia. So yeah, we do those, and we like to do those because it's always like a fun family reunion when people from all over the country show up and like, oh, I haven't seen you in forever, yay! And some of them bring their houses, which is super fun, and so yeah, it's great, and it's such a great community because we now know, like, we know people all over the country. All we have to do is reach out to them and say, hey, we're going to be in your neck of the woods, and we go and we visit and we do things, and it's like, we are old friends, we are good friends, and the only thing we have in common is that we've built this tiny house. But just because it's a similar mindset and we think similarly, so it creates a lot of camaraderie.
That's great.
Well, it looks like we're kind of over on time, but I want to make sure to thank you, Matt and Laura, for coming here today and talking about this. You're a great resource on tiny homes, and I mean, it makes me think someday I'd like to have a retirement area where you have a bunch of land and all your friends living in like tiny homes, so that way you can like work, help each other out and have socializing without being in a nursing home, which sounds like that kind of sucks right now. But
right,
I know, right? Ugh, horrible.
Tiny home elder care. I see it could work. They could all be in their own little stuff. We could even get them induction stoves so they don't burn themselves up. Like, we could make it work for them.
Oh my God.
That's actually part of our retirement plan is tiny home living. So
I think that's the dream. I'd love that. And then you can be close to nature and like all these things would be just amazing. I love that idea so much. So I do recommend for all of you who are watching that check out Laura's book. It's really very helpful. It walks you through a lot of the process. Start looking. I mean, if you're interested in it now, I mean, why not? Why not do it? Because
this sparks some idea in you to think about, well, what do I want to live in? What does this look like for me? And and it can even be your bug out property if we want to even go for that purpose. You could use a tiny home as a bug out property.
Exactly.
Just think about, well, what does my living space look like now, and am I happy with it? And then if you're not happy with it, what are your options from there? What can we do? What can my family do? And then maybe it might not be today, tomorrow, or next week. It might not be next month or next year. But if you start making slow movements towards that, you'll eventually end up at a place where you're like, we're building today, and now we've got the walls up, and it just becomes that explosion of excitement and newness that I think it doesn't have to take overnight. And like you guys said, this has been a process that's now taken you over a decade.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
let's not, put time restraints on it. I think that's another thing too. People are like, oh, I'm going to live in a tiny home. So like by 6 months from now, I'm going to be in my tiny home and everything's going to be great. I'm going to have solar panels. And it's going to be all great. And I'm going to be off the grid, and then it falls apart, and then they don't want to be a part of it.
Right.
If it's worth it, it takes time and effort, no matter what.
Right.
And I just wanted to say really, really quick, if anyone's watching and they have any questions about anything we've said here or about how they might get started, we're always happy to answer an email or whatnot about any questions people might have. So you can you can find us from the number 120squarefeet.com.
And we're on
is the
Facebook.
Website. Yeah, I know it's on Facebook. Yeah.
Pull that up right
I'll show you.
Yeah.
Like,
For real. Yeah.
Ta-da!
And I'm going to share this on multiple pages, so don't worry. You don't have to write it all down, but you can also, like, this is being recorded, so you could pause it if you wanted to.
Yeah,
also,
and we should put it up on the website as well. We'll put it up as a listing and all that good fun stuff for them, so that way people can see it and purchase it, and if they want it, and then just find out more information, because I think just reaching out and maybe asking questions can help bridge people over the gap.
Absolutely. And I mean, like, just you can go check out their Facebook page, their main website. There's contact information on all of these. You can watch some of their videos and reach out, because they're very nice people and they will help you out if you have questions. So don't be afraid. I mean, I ask Laura and Matt questions all the time, and they always answer very nicely, even though my questions aren't always super smart, but they know everything. So
there's no stupid question.
Right? You just have to ask the question, you know. And that's why you guys were the first people I thought of when I was like, oh, tiny home living and self-sustainability. Like, who do the people I know to talk about that, or just living in other structures outside of, you know, what we consider societal structure. And I was like, Matt, Laura, I got it. I was like, Heather, you talk to them.
We're glad you did.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us on. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt and Laura.
I enjoyed my time for sure.
And thank you, Scarlett. It was really fun getting to team up with you today. This is really awesome.
This is fun. So, you know, I know running the network, I'm always doing things. But this week I was like, nope, intro to prep week. It's going to be a big deal for me. I really, it makes me passionate to really get people and teach them things so that they can have their own self-sustainability and freedom. Eventually we want to open up Freedom Revolution Network Ranch where we all live together and do things and help each other. Awesome. Belle's going to Missouri now.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Ooh.
Yes. She's moving to Missouri. So she's trying to secure some property for us and might be in for, you know, some pitching in on stuff. So we're thinking we just want to have like a place that will eventually, you know, go and work together and have that community living and lifestyle, but with like-minded people who realize like we're here to all work and create something bigger than ourselves. So,
awesome. So we may actually have questions for Matt and Laura. So well, thank you guys. Have a wonderful week. And keep on viewing Freedom Revolution Network.
Absolutely. Come join us.
Bye, guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.